So, you probably are thinking, here we go again, more predictions, or more accurately, expectations, what we would like to see from Rolex or Tudor. This time around though, I'm not doing the predictions or sharing my expectations, these are yours. I took the best comments from the first part of the series and made a whole range of different watches to share with all of you. What makes it so cool is that as a community we can see how we all individually think and what we would like. And it seemed like a lot of fun. It took a good afternoon's worth of work putting these renders together, but some really are cool. It's all a fun thought process. So will these watches be introduced? Will we see these being released by Rolex or Tudor in the future? Probably not. But in saying that, some ideas are safer than others, and some are just ridiculous, and it's worth looking at just to have some fun and play around with a few concepts. And since we are sitting here just sharing our thoughts and ideas, who cares if they're not ever going to be available? The fun of this exercise is that we can all just enjoy the conversation and share more thoughts. The two watches that I really liked in the last video was the green bezel Daytona with the black subdials and the Tudor 1655 Explorer 2. Since that last video, I have given this Tudor a bit more of a facelift. I have looked at it in more detail and included some important elements that I think would make the watch all the more believable. So taking the Pella Gosse and adding those snowflake hands to the watch, cleaning up the dial a lot more, adding more emphasis on the arrow hand, giving a faux patina effect to the hands to just make that symmetry a little bit nicer. This watch looks sublime. Now, if this watch was released, I don't think we would see it with a Cyclops lens. That's not exactly Tudor's forte at this point in time. But many people really appreciated this idea and think that it will be an instant hit. So it would be awesome if this watch is ever released. Maybe not this year, maybe next year, we never know. Great starting point. And the Daytona was just cool because it gave that Kermit-esque aesthetic. It looked like an anniversary piece. But moving to your suggestions, in no particular order. I won't be mentioning your names, but I'm sure a lot of you will recognize your ideas as they get shown through the presentation. The first is a blueberry Tudor Gmt. Now this is quite possible when we think of how easy the formula is for a brand like Tudor to just replace the bezel, change the handset, and there we go. So in these two examples, what I've done is the first I've used contrasting blues. So more of a dark blue on the top, just left the original GMT Pepsi blue on the top, and then added a more brightly saturated base. Looks quite nice. That conflict of blue looks pretty cool. It's almost like a fade, a transition of colors. And then the next slide is a bit more of a realistic interpretation of what we might see from a blueberry. And it looks really good. Really does look nice. Tones down the piece, makes it simple. And then referring back to my original point in the first part of the series, looking at how they could possibly put the GMT movement in a Black Bay 58 case. Another interesting idea. Maybe this watch will be introduced in a smaller case, for example. It's pretty cool. Next we have the Panda Daytona. Great suggestion. And I have tried to realize what we would like to see, which is solid subdials and that Panda aesthetic. And you will see in a later picture that the two watches are side by side. You notice quite a difference between the two. In order to do this, I used the reference 116519, which is the white gold variant, and did a bit of modification there. Now, why would Rolex probably never do this? Well, on one hand, it will remove the attention away from the standard Daytona that we know now, the original Panda. But adding to that, odds are it is too safe and it's not exactly forward-thinking in their catalogue. They seem to be a family more focused on looking further into the future. And if they did have to incorporate solid subdials, it's very much playing into the past and looking back at those Paul Newmans and watches from that time period. I just don't see it being used as a motif in their range, but you never know. They are full of surprises. Great suggestion, and it's nice seeing this watch take its full form. Next, we're looking at Explorer 2s. Now, the suggestion was to put a Yachtmaster bezel on the Explorer 2, primarily because of the surface, the idea of this matte finish, and it looks really cool. Don't know so much about the knurling around the bezel for the functionality. The fact that now it looks more like a Yachtmaster with the dive bezel instead of a GMT bezel. But the finish looks great. I love that contrast. and it looks quite neat, especially when we look at the black variant. We can see that there is some kind of relationship there. Again, it's a bit too safe if they had to go this route, but maybe they could incorporate a matte ceramic bezel with a 24-hour scale. No idea. Great suggestion. Then we move to the Explorer 1, and what most people want to see is a inverted dial or a white dial Explorer. The typical layout is a standard white dial with white plots and white hands. It looks nice, very clean and simple, and this is probably what we would expect from the family if they were to release this watch. What I did was inverse those numerals and give the watch that glow-in-the-dark dial that everyone wants to see. It's a little bit more legible at a glance, and I decided against keeping the hands black so that you actually have luminova on the hands, making the reading experience a bit easier, especially in the dark. But there is a high chance we could see this, and I think it's not something we should eliminate because it's a very easy thing to do. All Rolex needs to introduce is a white dial, and you have a white dial Explorer that'll be extremely sought after, more so than the OP39s, more so than the standard Explorers for sure. Great thought. Then to the Rolex Gmt, there was a suggestion to look at the Coke bezel. This is also very safe, but plays into what Rolex might do very easily. Just replace the bezel insert. Black on top, red at the base, and what's nice about this is that you see more of a relationship between the bezel, the dial, and the GMT hand. Something about the Pepsi GMT that doesn't work as well is that clash of all those colors, where here it's a lot more monochromatic. It's a bit simpler to read at a glance. It looks very nice. Odds are we would see it on a Jubilee bracelet, I'm pretty sure. They just have to change out the bezel insert, and there we go. Next, an update on the Milgauss. This has been talked about for a long time, and this example seems to be one that everyone talks about often. It's a recreation of the 1019 Milgauss. If this was released, I'm sure the attention for it would skyrocket. It is a gorgeous looking watch. The vintage 1019 is absolutely stunning. I would even go so far to say that it rivals the 1016 Explorer, if we had to look into that history. Just that bright accent of red on the second hand, the red of Milgauss, simple, eloquent, understated, looks like a great dress sports watch. Another great suggestion. Then to the Tudor Black Bay Chronograph. The suggestion was to make it a Panda dial. So all that was done here was inverting the color scheme, and this example has a steel bezel insert. Looks really neat, nice and clean. The legibility on the subdials is great, but then you can't exactly read the time very well. So if I did go back into this, I would probably make the handset black, so it would be a bit easier to read, but you get the idea. Then we transition to a possible aluminium bezel insert on this piece, and it looks cool. Like that contrast. It's nice seeing where the minute track is in relation to where the dial ends and where the bezel begins. You notice that there's quite a nice open negative space there. Looks cool. Very clean. A great watch to think about. And this is a watch that could easily be produced by Tudor because it's so simple. Once again, invert your colors and there's your example. All you really need to do is adjust the dial and you're finished. Next, there was a suggestion about the Pella without a date complication. It looks really nice and clean. Simple. You can never go wrong with a no date version. Then a really cool suggestion. Looking at the Tudor Ranger. The idea was to make it a 38mm. And I took that idea and thought to myself, how could we make this watch look more old school? And did a few modifications. If you look at the watch side by side with the standard one you see now, you notice that I adjusted the bracelet. I gave the watch a Black Bay bracelet, but then did something with the dial. Instead of decreasing the size of the case and everything else, I decreased the size of the dial ever so slightly and increased the bezel width. So it gives it quite a clean aesthetic. It looks much more old school. I also adjusted the luminova around the dial, made it look more cream than that green hue that seems to be on the piece. But it's great. I mean, this watch has a Tudor rose. It's very much playing to the strengths of the original Ranger. And that added vintage aesthetic with a rivet bracelet and the proportions toned down ever so slightly looks really interesting. Would make for a superb piece. There was also a suggestion to look at the root beer GMT that we know and just simply give it a Jubilee bracelet. But on top of that, why not play around with the dial? Add more of a chocolate accent to the dial. I've done this in the past. This was one of the edits that I did on this piece when discussing it a couple of months ago. The watch alone with a Jubilee bracelet looks very nice. It's something we could expect to see from the family, very simple to do, but with a chocolate dial as well, Really brings that character even more forward. Is it a little bit too much? Has it been overdone? Possibly. But I don't think we could eliminate this idea. I think this is another one that is quite plausible in the scheme of things. Then to the Submariner. Now, someone simply said a red line Submariner. And actually, they could have easily hit that on the head because, as we know, the Sea Dweller got its overhaul, received a line of red text. Why can't the new Submariner receive the same treatment? So what I did with this example, using the date complication, was pretty much make it look like a 1680. First thing was eliminating the gloss dial, making it a matte dial Submariner, and incorporating a red line of text. Simple, easy. Looks stunning. This render really came out looking good. Then going into the case proportions, why not just tone it down? And then I kind of took inspiration from the 90s themed pieces, and once again, looks so cool. We all love simple tapered cases. I also adjusted the crown guards. And then just to add insult to injury, why not make a grey bezel insert? Just to give it that faded patina effect even more so. Does look like a rugged tool watch, but we would never see the piece go this far. At most, we would see the watch just simply incorporate a matte dial and a red Submariner line of text. It would look great. Another suggestion for the Tudor Pepsi GMT is simply giving it a white Pan Am dial, and it looks superb. Just great. Again, if I had to go back and re-edit this a bit more, maybe it would be to bring out the highlights a little bit better around the dial. The chapter ring needs to be black, and the hands and all those details should also be emphasized a bit more. But it looks cool. It plays to the strengths, once again, of that original Rolex Pan Am model that was produced in a watch very similar to this, as a matter of fact. Finally, in the lineup, there was a suggestion to look at the Tudor Submariner. What I did with this example was simply drop a Tudor Submariner dial on a Pella case. This was quite the characteristic layout in the 80s and the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. And it would be nice to see Tudor returning to form. If they were to ever produce a Submariner again, these triangles at the quarters and round plots with a Mercedes handset would look awesome. Really does look cool, and most people would be able to recognize this watch as a Tudor. So it would be nice to see them experiment a little bit more with their dial designs in the future. Who knows if that's the case. Of all the watches in the lineup that I really like, I think the Panda Daytona looks superb. Love that contrast, love the simplicity of the dial, really ties it all in together. The reason why they haven't used this is probably because it's too safe. Many other brands incorporate this aesthetic, like Omega and Zenith, so that is probably why they have eliminated the idea and decided to use the whole negative space format with their Daytonas for the most part. Whether you like it or not, this is a very characteristic element for the Daytona at this point in time. Rolex has used these set of subdials and remained this way because it's effective and because you can easily and almost instantly recognize that it's a Daytona at a glance. Another model that I think is great, and one that we could very much expect to see from the family at a later stage, is this Blueberry GMT. Easy to be done. Very simple change of colors, quite practical, also plays into that Rolex past, and this watch would be sought after by most people. The inverted Explorer could be quite a safe approach, but one that we would see from the family if they were brave enough to go the extra length. We have seen Oyster Perpetuals and Air Kings and other variants that have used this dial format before, so it's not so much of a stretch considering that this might be an option. And finally, I think one that we could all agree might be a possibility is the idea of a matte dial red sub. It's so simple, it has been done before, so it's not exactly stretching the limits when you think about it. The watch really does look good. And you have to ask whether or not this watch would be more sought after than the Sea Dweller 43. That might cause a conflict in the brand at a later stage. You never know. But those are a handful of your comments and what you would like to see, your predictions and expectations from the family. This was a lot of fun to put together, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's nice seeing such a varied use of thought, and me just being the person to convey the idea for everyone to see. The watch that still wins the show for me is the Tudor Explorer. I'm so excited and would love for this piece to be made, purely because I think it sits so well in that realm of 70s nostalgia. The watch looks terrific with snowflake hands, which is quite a surprise as well. And that relationship seems to work very well with this format, because it was a late 60s, 70s inspired handset in the first place. If you would like to continue this thread, comment more suggestions and ideas below, and I'll see what I can do. Maybe we can run a part 3 with more of your designs. And who knows, maybe we will see one of these watches released. Your guess is as good as mine.